Picture a scene too grotesque for fiction. A pope, 9 months dead, clawed from his tomb, his decaying frame draped in frayed ceremonial robes. Dust clings to the fabric as he's propped on a throne in a dimly lit basilica, facing a courtroom filled with the living. This isn't a nightmare spun by a fevered mind. It's history's strangest trial, the Cadaver Synod of the year 896 AD. The Vatican, revered as a bastion of sanctity, became a stage for vengeance, corruption, and a spectacle that still chills the spine over 1,000 years later. Meet Pope Formosus, the unwilling star of this grim drama. His name, meaning beautiful in Latin, ironically masked a life tangled in ugliness. Ascending to the papacy in 891 AD, he inherited a Rome teetering on chaos. The 9th century was far from a golden age for the Church. It was a brutal arena where popes wielded swords as often as blessings. Kings and emperors vied fiercely for influence, and Formosus navigated this dangerous game with cunning. In a bold move that angered powerful rivals, he crowned Arnulf of Carinthia as Holy Roman Emperor. This decision deeply antagonized influential factions, particularly the formidable Spoleto family. Formosus's shifting alliances brought him both staunch supporters and bitter enemies. When he died in 896 AD, his adversaries saw no reason to let grudges fade with his passing. Enter Pope Stephen VI, a man whose tenure would become synonymous with madness. Thin and wiry, with eyes flickering with resentment, Stephen served as a puppet for the Spoleto dynasty, who despised Formosus for thwarting their imperial ambitions. Formosus's crowning of Arnulf gnawed deeply at Stephen's pride, becoming a wound that festered long after the old pope's burial. By 897 AD, Stephen hatched an audacious, unhinged plan: exhume Formosus and put him on trial. In his mind, even death wouldn't shield the deceased pope from punishment. The scene defies imagination. Formosus's corpse, exhumed from its resting place in St. Peter's Basilica, was a ghastly sight. Flesh sagging, bones protruding through rotted skin, the stench of decay permeating the chamber. Yet there he sat, grotesquely adorned in papal vestments, a mockery of his former glory. Flies buzzed in the flickering torchlight, adding to the grim atmosphere. A young deacon, pale and trembling, was forced forward as the defense attorney to speak for the mute accused, his voice cracking under the absurdity. Stephen, perched like a vulture, shrieked charges at the corpse: ambition, perjury, violation of church law. Of course, the corpse offered no rebuttal. Silence was taken as guilt. The verdict came swiftly and cruelly. Formosus was stripped of his sacred titles, his robes torn away, revealing the ruin beneath. The 2 fingers he'd used to bless the faithful were hacked off, a symbolic destruction of his spiritual authority. Finally, with ultimate indignity, his remains were hurled into the murky depths of the Tiber River. Stephen might have felt triumphant, believing vengeance was complete, but Rome saw things differently. The city simmered with unease and anger. Common folk whispered anxiously in markets. Priests murmured their disapproval in shadowed cloisters. To the people, this wasn't justice. It was a desecration, a violation of God's divine order. Outrage quickly boiled over. Formosus's loyalists, supported by an appalled populace, rose against Stephen. His reign collapsed rapidly. Captured by an angry mob, Stephen was dragged to a dark prison cell where a coarse rope ended his reign, a cold, poetic justice. Fishermen later retrieved Formosus' battered corpse from the river, and his followers quietly reburied him with dignity and reverence. His decrees, previously nullified, were restored. It seemed the dead pope had ultimately outlasted his tormentor. But the Cadaver Synod was more than just a grotesque historical event. It exposed deep-rooted corruption and unchecked power within the medieval church. Historian Liutprand of Cremona, writing a century later, captured the event's grim reality. Rome wept, the powerful laughed. Power had eclipsed true piety, transforming sacred halls into ruthless battlegrounds. Formosus, ambitious and flawed, was no saint. Stephen, volatile and vengeful, was no shepherd. Both were trapped in a system valuing crowns over crosses, leaving a troubling legacy of moral decay. Today, the Cadaver Synod endures as a stark warning. It whispers through history, urging us to reflect deeply on our own times. What spectacles do we allow, political, moral, or otherwise, that future generations might recoil from in disbelief? Formosus's trial, absurd and horrifying, challenges us to question: when power corrupts completely, what remains truly sacred? Perhaps the ultimate judgment lies not in that ancient courtroom, but in how clearly we see ourselves in the mirror of history.